I've never been one to believe in witchcraft, curses, or other supernatural stuff. I've always been skeptical, more concerned with bills and deadlines than with signs from beyond. But if there's one thing I've learned in the past few months, it's that you don't have to believe in what's out there for it to believe in you. It all started when I decided to get away from the city. I was exhausted, a messy breakup, problems at work, sleepless nights. I needed to escape, to clear my head. A friend mentioned a village called Ashwood Hollow in rural Tennessee. She said it was quiet, almost forgotten by time, that the rent was cheap and no one bothered you. It sounded exactly what I needed. The house was simple, a bit old, with dark wood and a front porch, surrounded by thick trees with a dirt road leading to the village. The kind of place where time moves slowly. In the first few days, it was actually good. No one knocking on the door, no traffic noise, just the sound of swaying branches and the creaking of the house when the wind blew hard. But there was something strange in the air. The villagers weren't hostile, but they weren't friendly either. They greeted you with a brief nod, eyes down, almost as if they were avoiding prolonged contact. There were few stores, a small market, an old gas station, an empty diner. Everyone seemed to be watching without watching. I figured it was just a small town thing, closed off people, fine by me. But it was on the third morning that I realized something wasn't right. I went out early for a walk, and when I went to open the rusty iron gate in front, I saw a small package hanging from it, a piece of cloth tied with a thick string. It looked dirty, heavy. At first I thought it was trash or some local offering, I don't know. Curious, and perhaps stupid, I picked up the package to throw it away. But as soon as I lifted it, I realized that the cloth was wet, and something thick and dark was dripping from it. The smell was horrible, a mixture of rotten meat and wet earth. It gave me the chills right away. I tried to open it just a little, and the contents almost made me throw up. Pieces of raw meat mixed with feathers and something that looked like human hair. There was also a small broken bone. I dropped it right away, as if it burned my hand. I tried to rationalize. Maybe some local superstition, something from an old resident, I don't know. But even so, it stayed in my head for the rest of the day. I went to the diner in the afternoon, a small place, worn counters, where one or two residents were drinking coffee. I casually asked the attendant, a quiet guy named Clint, if it was common for someone to leave strange gifts on the gates. He looked at me for a second without answering and just shrugged. When I insisted, he said, "Ashwood Hollow has its traditions. Better not to mess with what you don't understand." That bothered me. I went home and threw the package far away, burying it in a garbage bag in the backyard. I tried not to think about it anymore. But that night, I dreamed of someone knocking on the back door, a rhythmic knock, as if the person knew I was awake. In the dream, I got up and went to the door. I looked through the glass and saw only a thin silhouette standing in the dark with something hanging around its neck. When I opened the door, I woke up. My heart was racing, the sound of the knock still echoing in my ears. In the following days, things started to get worse. I would wake up with the feeling that someone was inside the house. The doors would appear ajar, the porch light would turn on and off by itself, even with the switch off. I found a small amulet made of twisted wood on the living room rug, with strands of hair wrapped around it. The village seemed more and more oppressive. People greeted me even less. The small market started closing earlier. Everything seemed to be looking at me, even when no one was looking. That's when I noticed I was starting to cough. At first, I thought it was allergies, the climate maybe, but soon came the fatigue, the bad sleep, that feeling of constant weight on my chest. Nothing that medicine would solve. until an old man, who I only saw from afar on the porch of an old house at the end of the road, called me. His name was Mr. Elijah. He waved, asking me to come closer. I went there, and he went straight to the point. "You messed with what you shouldn't have, son." I tried to laugh, pretend I didn't know what he was talking about, but he just shook his head. "Here, when they want to mark someone, they leave a sign. You should have ignored it. Now it's stuck to you." I was silent. I asked what it meant. He sighed, looked at the surrounding woods and spoke softly. "Someone wants to wither you, to take you down slowly, and if you don't break, they will succeed." Before I could ask more, he handed me a small folded piece of paper. He told me to come back at night, when everything was quiet, if I wanted to know more. I went home with my head spinning. On the sheet were symbols drawn by hand, some squiggles that looked like a mixture of letters and drawings. But I didn't understand anything. That night, I dreamed again of the door. The same knock, the same figure standing in the dark. Only this time it raised its hand and showed the same wooden amulet that I had found on the rug. When I woke up, I smelled the strong smell of something burning coming from the backyard. And that's when I understood that this wasn't just superstition. There was something very wrong following me. The next morning, after that strange dream and the smell of something burning coming from the backyard, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took the paper that old Elijah had given me and went to his house. The village seemed emptier than usual. The few residents who crossed my path looked away as if they didn't want to see me. The air was heavier, and the feeling of being watched only increased. When I arrived at Elijah's porch, he was already sitting as if waiting for me. He didn't say anything for a while, just looked at the horizon, rocking slowly in the old wooden chair. It was he who broke the silence. "I told you not to mess with what they leave at your door, but you wanted to throw it away. Now you'll have to carry the weight." I sat there, not knowing what to say. Then he started talking without looking at me. "Ashwood Hollow is old, older than these houses. Before the village, before the road. Here, people learned to mess with the things of the earth, of the woods, binding spells, destruction spells, withering spells. But these things have a cost." He pointed to the crumpled paper in my hand. "This is a sign. Whoever leaves it knows exactly what they're doing, marks the person to fall little by little, first in health, then in the head." I asked the obvious. Who did this? Why? I didn't know anyone there. He gave a bitter smile. "You don't need to know. Sometimes whoever orders it is far away. Pay someone here, old people who still know the ways." My head was spinning. How did someone from outside know where I was? I barely told one or two people that I had moved. Elijah seemed to read my thoughts. "You brought this with you, son. It didn't start here, it just found ground to grow." We were silent for a while. Then he said something that never left my head. "If you want to cut it, you'll have to give it back." I asked what it meant. He only answered that there's a way to break it, but you need to want to pay the price. That night I went home with the weight of the world on my shoulders, and that's when things started to get really bad. First it was my body. The cough became stronger, drier, as if tearing inside. I lost my appetite. I felt weak, as if every night's sleep was a weight that didn't rest. I looked in the mirror, and my face seemed paler, thinner. Then it was the house. Doors opening by themselves, whispers coming from the porch at 3 in the morning, the smell of rotten meat in the hallway, without explanation. My dog, who was the only thing that kept me company, started to get sick. She would stop in front of the back door and cry for no apparent reason. One night, I woke up and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the backyard, standing looking at the woods, completely still, as if someone had called her out. It was also around this time that I lost contact with the world outside, cell phone with no signal, internet crashing all the time. When I managed to call someone, it seemed that the call would cut off, or they would say that my voice was failing, distant. The isolation swallowed me up. I went one last time to the diner. Clint, the attendant, barely looked at me. When I asked about Elijah, he lowered his eyes and said, "Better not to get too close to him. The old man knows too much." That's when I started thinking about going back to the city. But every time I tried to leave, something stopped me. A flat tire, a fever, malaise. Always some obstacle that made me give up halfway. One early morning, I woke up hearing that knock again. Not in the dream this time. 3 rhythmic knocks, front gate. I looked out the window and there it was. A figure standing on the dirt road. Tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I couldn't see his face. The same figure from the dreams. But there was something worse. On the doorknob hanging was another package, just like the first one, only this time wrapped with a thicker, stained red thread. Something inside me said, "Don't touch it. Don't open it." I froze, watching through the crack in the curtain until the figure disappeared into the dark. The next morning, I went straight to Elijah's house. The old man seemed more dejected, as if he hadn't slept in days. I told him about the package, about the figure. He just confirmed, "Now they're coming to get what they left. If you don't do anything, they'll take everything." That's when he told me, with all the calm in the world, "There's a way. But you'll have to do something you might not want to. You'll have to give it back." I asked how. He said that in that village there are things buried long ago, things that bind one person to another. You cut, or you're trapped forever. He told me to come back at night, that he would show me where to go. But he made a point of warning. When you cut it, it doesn't always come back the same way. At that moment, I felt that my life was no longer mine. I returned home after the conversation with Elijah, feeling like each step I took sank me further. The village seemed emptier, the wind colder, and even the surrounding forest seemed to close in a little more each day. That night, as agreed, I went to his house. He was already waiting for me on the porch, lights off, a thick cloth over his lap. Without saying much, he handed me a small leather bag tied with cord. The smell that came from it was strong, something between dried herbs and burnt meat. "Here's everything you need," he said, without looking at me. "But don't come back with me, understand? The rest you do alone." I just nodded. He explained to me in a dry voice that there was a place in the back of the village, beyond the abandoned train tracks, a piece of land where settlements used to be made. He said that in order to break the mark, I needed to take that bag, bury it there, and say some words that were written on a piece of paper inside. It seemed simple, but he made it clear. It doesn't matter what you hear or see. Don't turn your back. Don't answer a call. Go, bury, speak, and leave without looking back. Easier said than done. I left his house with a heavy, moonless sky. The dirt road to the tracks was deserted, only the sound of my own steps accompanying me. When I arrived at that piece of land, I understood why no one went there. It was a small clearing, surrounded by trees so closed that they looked like walls. The grass was yellowed, the air still, and a smell of wet earth with rust. I dug with my hands, the leather bag firm in my coat pocket. My whole body seemed to vibrate, a strange tingling sensation rising from my stomach. When I finally opened the bag to bury it, I saw that inside there were pieces of wood, strands of hair, I didn't ask whose, something that looked like a small bone, and the folded piece of paper. The written words were simple, but there was something wrong. A guttural sound which didn't seem like English nor anything I had ever heard. I started reciting while burying the contents. With each word, I felt the air around me become denser. The wind stopped. There was no noise anymore. until I heard footsteps behind me. It was not my imagination. It was clear, leaves being stepped on, a branch breaking. I forced myself to continue without looking, without stopping. Then came the worst. A voice, low, familiar, called my name. It wasn't Elijah. It wasn't anyone from the village. It was the voice of my ex-girlfriend. The same intonation, the way she called me when she was angry. But there was something empty, emotionless, as if it was someone imitating her. My whole body froze, but I kept talking. The voice repeated, this time closer, almost whispering in my ear, "Why don't you answer me? Why did you come here?" I finished bearing the bag, recited the last words, and without thinking, I walked away firmly without looking back. Only the moment I passed the tracks, I heard one last thing, which almost made me stumble. No matter where you go, I'm already in there. When I got home, the world seemed normal again. The strange smell disappeared. My dog was calm. The air in the village seemed less heavy, as if something had finally left. The next day, I decided it was time to leave. Elijah wasn't on the porch. The diner seemed empty. Not even Clint was there. I packed my things and followed back to the city. I left that forgotten village behind. At least that's what I thought. It's hard to explain. My life went back to normal, more or less. Work, routine, people around. But there are days when I wake up in the middle of the night and feel that strong smell of wet earth and rust in the room. Sometimes I hear knocks on the back door, and every now and then, when I pass shop windows or mirrors on the street, I think I see a tall figure standing behind me, a thin, motionless figure. I never look for long. I just keep walking. But deep down, I know. That mark may have been cut, but a part of it remained, and it knows exactly where to find me.